feelings about the future of the official manual, the Blue Book? Every now and then there's talk about eliminating it and going online and so on. So what are your feelings about that? What's the future of the Blue Book?
This question goes first to Wes Upchurch.
I believe that it needs to be made available in multiple formats. In an increasing world where we have more and more technology, it's important that we make all of our documentation, including the Blue Book, available through those means. You should be able to go online and download it or view it in a browser, but at the same time, we don't want to exclude people that are still reading print material. I mean, myself, I have all kinds of books in my house, and I'm not about to read them on a PDF. It makes more sense to open them up in physical copy. And so I would allow for both formats to exist and be updated yearly.
Mitch Upchurch.
Well, first off, regarding the Blue Book, a question I've received several times during this campaign is, will the Blue Book remain blue? And the answer to that is yes. The Blue Book will remain blue when I'm elected. But that's a very good question. We do need to go to electronic forms so we can save money and so that people can have access from their home computers and from their offices. But I do believe we need to always have hard copies of the Blue Book, because we need those for our offices, for attorneys' offices, for our state libraries, for people who may not have access to computers. We need to make sure that we have that. And people who want those, they need to have the ability to get that hard copy. Because personally, although I'm on the internet a lot, I prefer to read a book the old-fashioned way, on paper.
Rob McCarty.
People love the Blue Book. And for folks who want access to information about government, they get it there. We already have the Blue Book. I like your idea about having it online, and guess what? We have it online already. And so people can access it online if they want to. But we put copies out to all the universities, to all the high schools and libraries in our state, and the response we get from it is overwhelming. People like to learn about the state, and I think we should continue to let them do that through access to the Blue Book.
Okay. I'll ask the question here. Probably be our final question. We're about out of time. In recent years, there's been a lot of news turning in initiative petitions to the Secretary of State's office, which has raised the question of whether it is too easy or too difficult to get measures on the ballot. There have been some who have proposed that we should perhaps raise the threshold, raise the number of signatures required to get measures on the ballot. I want to hear your thoughts on that, about whether the standard needs to be raised or perhaps lowered. This question goes first to Mitch Upchurch.
Well, like I said, our Constitution, as I mentioned, says we the people reserve this right, so it's a very important right, and we should not infringe upon that right. We do need to make sure that things are being done properly, that the signatures are being collected properly, and we have a system for doing that. I do not believe that the threshold is too low. It is a very difficult and expensive process to get the initiative on the ballot. First off, you have to get past the Secretary of State and get fair ballot language. That's the key, fair ballot language. Once you've got the fair ballot language, then you have to collect approximately, it's based upon the last governor's race, so the numbers increase or decrease based upon how many voters voted in the gubernatorial race. But you have to get approximately 150,000 signatures, and you have to get those signatures in 6 out of 9 legislative congressional districts. So it is not an easy process by any imagination. There are some questions about whether we should allow outsiders from outside the state of Missouri to come in and be paid to collect those signatures. I think that is a valid issue. I believe that people from Missouri should be the ones collecting those signatures. However, I do not have a problem with paying them to collect the signatures as long as they are doing that properly. But it should be Missouri citizens. We shouldn't have people from Michigan and Illinois and basically people who do this as a career coming in here collecting signatures, because they have less value. The best system is a system where you have volunteers. It's not always possible to get enough volunteers, but these groups should work to get as many volunteers involved, because the volunteers truly care about that issue, and they will make sure that they do the job correctly.
Rob McCarty.
I'm a believer in the initiative petition process. Historically, it's interesting to look at who has this in the country, and there's about 24 states that have initiative petitions, and they tend to be mainly west of the Mississippi. So it's clear that this came about in our country because the citizens wanted to be able to have their voice heard. Maybe the governments didn't meet that regularly, and they had, there was a lot of distance between them, and needed to have this. The process has certainly changed. Since I've been in office, we've had almost 50 of these things put in. We've had lawsuits about almost all of them. They're a time-consuming, important task. And what we try to do is make sure that folks know what they're voting on. I think that there are standards that could be changed to make the process even more fair. First thing I think is to make sure that the folks who are gathering signatures aren't paid by the signature, and that they also are residents and voters in Missouri, so we don't have these out-of-state groups continuing to come in and try to change our laws when there's not any kind of local support for it. The second is, I think we need to change the standard for constitutional changes. Right now, it takes 5% of the vote to change a statute, and 5% of the voters to sign something to get on the ballot to change a statute, and only 8% to change the Constitution. I think that's too low of a standard. I think our Constitution is something that ought to be sacred and ought not be just because you got 50,000 more signatures that some out-of-state group can come in and change it. I think we need to maintain control of that, and I'd be for changing that standard.
West Upchurch.
Well, regarding paid petitioners, basically, you're not going to get somebody to spend 3, 4, 5 months of their life collecting signatures and, in the process, not pay their mortgage. It's ridiculous to expect that. So I agree that petitioners, if the organization collecting signatures wants to pay the people, let them pay them. It's not the government's job to get involved in a private petitioning effort. Regarding the requirement, 150,000 signatures is a lot of signatures, and it's not like we can't meet that number. Several ballot initiatives make it every single year. So raising it, though, is also unnecessary. I think it's set based on the proportion of how many people vote, and it needs to stay that way. If anything needs to be lowered, it's the signature requirements for ballot access for new parties. So that's my position. Thanks.